In order to efficiently create websites, we need to know many properties. Today we are going to get to know only a few examples just to see how they are built. In the following sections of this course, I will try to divide the properties into certain groups. For example, the properties that are used to style text, background, and so on. Now, however, I would like to focus on the basic properties related to the box model. You will learn what the box model is soon in this course. One of the properties that define the box model is the margin, which we already know. Next property that creates the box model is the padding, which is the inner margin. And we define this property very much like in the case of the usual margin. We can provide 4 values, or we can refer to a specific element site in the property name. We can also use different units to define padding and use negative values as well. In contrast to the margin, padding is the part of our element. It is inside our element and not outside like the margin. Another property is the border, which is the frame of our element. The basic notation of this property that we will use most often can be seen in the first example on this slide. We use the word border in the property name and 3 positions in its value. The first refers to the width of the border, in this case 3 pixels. The second refers to the type of the border. In this case it is solid, which is a solid line. The third position refers to the color of our border. In this case the color is specified by a hexadecimal number. In addition, we can specify the color of our border or its style separately, which you can see in the next examples on this slide. Now I would like to show you these properties in practice. I've prepared a simple document, which you can see right here. It's a basic HTML structure, and all we have in our body tag are 2 div tags, one with the class of first and the second with the class of second. Now you can see those 2 div tags in our HTML document, but they are not visible in the browser. Now let's open our DevTools and let's check them out. Let's select the selecting tool. Let's expand our HTML code right here, like this. We can see we have our div with the class first, right here, and our div with the class of second, right here, but we actually can't see them in the browser. And here's why. Divs are the block elements by default, and the block elements, like all the elements in the HTML language, have their initial properties and values. So the block elements by default always have 100% of the width of the parent, but their height is by default set to auto. So they take up as much space of the height as they need. And since those elements are empty at the moment, they don't need any height, so their height is automatically set to 0, which we can see in our DevTools. You can see it in a corner of our browser window, where our div with the class of second has 100% of its parent width, which is computed by the browser to 750 pixels, and its height is 0. It's the same situation as with our first div, which you can see exactly right here. And what I mean when I say that the block elements take as much height as they need. For example, if we put some text into our div, it will expand the height of the element, because now the font has to be visible. Let's save our document, and we can see the change instantly. Let's select our div, and now you can see its width is still the same. It's 750 pixels, but now its height is 18 pixels. So it automatically expanded itself to display the text in it. Now let's delete this text from here. Let's create a style tag in our document. Let's create a rule for our first div. Let's set its width to 300 pixels. Let's set its height to 100 pixels and its color to red, for example. Let's save the changes. Of course, we won't see any change because I used the wrong property. The color property refers to the font color, and the property I was looking for was obviously the background color. Now let's save our file, and we can see the effect instantly on our monitor right now. Let's add some text to our div and let it be first element 1. Let's save it, and we can see the text in our element perfectly. Let's make it a little bit smaller right here. Now let's change the font color of our element to be more visible, and that's where we should use the color property. Let's make it white. Let's save it, and now the text is more visible in our element. Now let's copy this whole rule and let's paste it below, changing few things. Let's change its width to 200 pixels. Let's change its height to 200 pixels as well, so it's gonna be a square. Let's change its background color to green, for example. Let's leave the color of the font to white as it is. And let's add a text to our second div. Let it be second element 2. Let's save our file. And we get what we get. Our second rule overwrites the first rule, and that's just because we didn't change the class name right here. So we didn't actually refer to our second div, but once again to the first one. And that's where we have to change the class name to second, so the first rule will refer to our first div, and the second rule will refer to our second div. Now let's save our file. And this is the exact effect we will get. The second div will set itself right below the first one, because that's how the block elements behave by default, without any space between, so without any margin, as you can see. You can see the body has its own margin, which is 8 pixels by default, but the div tag has no margin by default. So it's always good to do a reset, which we can do in our style tag, placing the asterisk symbol, creating a rule, and setting the margin to 0. Let's save our file. And voila, all the margins on our website are now gone. Now let's set the margin to our first element. Right here. Let's make it 10 pixels. As you can see, I use only one value, so we will get 10 pixels margin at each side of our element. Let's save our file, and voila. You can see our first element is separated from the edges of the browser window, and the second element with the 10 pixels margin. As you know, margin property has 4 properties inside, which we can see in our DevTools as well. If we open our body tag, select our first div, go to the styles used inside it, we can see the margin property set to 10 pixels. And if we click this little triangle right here, we will get margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left, all set to 10 pixels. We can as well use 2 values in our property. For example, 10 pixels, 20 pixels. And then our first value will refer to the margin top and margin bottom, and our second value will refer to our margin left and margin right. Let's save the file, and we can see the difference. Let's check it in our DevTools, like this. Scroll a little bit down. We can see our margin, which is 10 pixels, 20 pixels, and it's actually margin top set to 10 pixels, margin right set to 20 pixels, margin bottom set to 10 pixels, and margin left set to 20 pixels. It's the same situation as we would use for values, like 10 pixels and 20 pixels. So now we have 4 values, and as we know, they are going clockwise always. So the first one is margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left. But it's good to place 4 values if we have 4 different values. Like for example, 50 pixels and 100 pixels, like this. So now it makes sense, because when we check our element and go to its margin property, we have these 4 values which are different for each side of the element. Because when the situation is how it was, like this, let's save our document. We know that we can type it simpler and quicker, like this. And in programming and developing, quicker means better, always. Before I will go to the padding property, I want to give you a little bonus of how to center our element on our website using the margin property. We can use auto value for that. Auto value in the margin property means take all the free space you got. So let's try it out. Let's go with the 4 different values for our margin. Once again. And for now, it's simple. We got 10 pixels margin from the top, 20 pixels margin from the right, 50 pixels from the bottom, and 100 pixels from the left. But if it comes to the left or right side of the element, we can use the auto value to set the margin for all the free space that is left outside our element. For example, for the left side of our element, like this. So now it will be 10 pixels from the top, 20 from the right, 50 from the bottom, and all the free space from the left. Let's check it out. This will be the effect. We can use it with the right side of our element as well. Like this. So now we have 100 pixels from our left side of the element and all the free space from the right side of our element. It doesn't work with the margin top and margin bottom, so we can't use it this way. Like for example, making margin top auto. We can see the margin is 0 right now. It doesn't work with the margin bottom as well, as you can see on your screen. But it works with margin left and margin right. And if you will set margin right to auto and margin left to auto as well, it will mean for the element to take all the free space from both sides and split it equally. So that will place our element in the center of our website. Let's check it out. Exactly like this. And now no matter how big or small our window will be, our element will be always at its center. Of course, we can use the short notation If we want our margin top and margin bottom be different, but our margin left and margin right be the same, we can only use the 3 values in our property. It will get the same effect because the 4th value will be copied from the 2nd one. And if we want our margin top and margin bottom be the same, and we want to center our element on our website, all we need to do is place the value for the top and the bottom, and then place the auto to center our element from the left and the right, like this. And voila. As I said, centering with the margin value won't work horizontally, so it's no use for the margin top and margin bottom, but keeping it in the center from left and right, it will do the trick. Now let's place our 10 margin pixels only, and let's go to the padding property. Let's add a padding of 20 pixels. The notation is the same as with the margin property, so it would be 20 pixels at each side of the element. Let's save our file. And this is the effect we will get. By default, the padding makes the element bigger and separate the text from the edges of the element. So now it's bigger by 20 pixels on each side of the element. Now let's add a border with the border property. And let's make it 13 pixels solid black. Let's save our file. And this is exactly what we will get. This is the border of our element. But what are default border properties if we won't define the border for ourselves? Because we know that every HTML element has its initial properties defined in the official specification, and we can also have the default properties set by the browser. So I want to show this to you. Let's comment for now our border property, and by default the border property for every HTML element is this. Let's save our file, and we can see that this is the same effect as before when we didn't even have the border property defined in our element. But it's there, and it's exactly like this. So by default, the border for each HTML element has its 0 width, so it's basically not visible. Its style is set to none, and its color is by default set as the same as the font color. So by default, it would be black, but in our case, since we changed the font color to white, it will be white as well, just like this. But as you can see, the effect is still the same. Our border is not visible. Now let's comment this property as well. And I want to show you what actually the border property is. The first thing is the border width. Let's set it to 10 pixels. The second thing is the border style. Let's make it dotted this time. And the third thing is the border color. Let's make it blue this time. Let's save our document. And this is the effect we will get. We can even change the style from dotted to dashed, for example. Then we will change the dots to the dashes in the border of our element. But the most popular style is, of course, solid which is a solid line. Now if we comment our border color like this and save our file, our border is still there, which we can see in our DevTools. It's this line right here, and it's still 10 pixels solid line. But since we didn't define its color, it's by default the font color, which is white in our case. But if we will comment our border style, you can see the difference already on your monitor, and we don't even see this border in the DevTools because its style changed from the solid to none, which makes this border not visible. So now the border width doesn't even matter since our style is none. So the easiest way to set the border of our element is just placing the border property like this. When we set the border width to, for example, 13 pixels in this example, border style to solid, as you can see, and border color to black. Let's save our file, and this is the effect we will get. Now what is interesting is that the percentages specifying our border width will not work. Now let's check our element in our DevTools. Let's go to our styles. And now you can see that our whole border property is crossed out. Just like with our commented properties, because percentages are not recognizable in this case. But let's change those percentages to viewport width, for example. Let's see the effect. And now you can see that the viewport units work perfectly fine for the border property. Now you can see it's responsive because the viewport units are responsive. But let's go back to pixels, because we usually set our borders with pixels. We can change the color of our border for only one side, for example. We don't need this. Let's change border top color to royal blue, for example, and you'll get this effect. We can also use bottom color, left or right color if we would like to. But we usually set one color for our border. As you can see, we got to know many CSS properties and we learned how to use them on the websites. Now it's time for your assignment. So without any extension, let's get started.